G'day, Chrissy.
Hi, Matt. How you doing?
Oh, fantastic. Had an interesting start to the day today. How about you?
I'm having a good morning.
Beautiful.
Would you like to elaborate on your interesting start to the day?
Well, to give some backstory context, we've got a team member of ours who's based in the Philippines, and she's really good at what she does. But we recently noticed, because we use a shared account on ChatGPT, that she'd run her resume through chat and asked it for some advice on how to improve her resume as a social media manager. Not against people looking to improve their position or seek other opportunities. We found that this particular situation has probably presented a challenge for us a lot earlier than what we'd had anticipated. So she's only been with us for about 8 months. And in that period of time, I suppose her productivity is something that we've had certain concessions that we've allowed for, associated with things that are connected to health challenges and time constraints and family requirements and distractions and a range of other things. So not to get too deep into the weeds of where we're at the moment from a performance perspective, but we have found ourselves in a situation now where we're looking at the structure of our employment, not based on anything that we've instigated, but based on something that she's brought to the table. So that is in the form of a request that's come forward to me by email, and we have chats on Discord as well, where she's requested to transition from being full-time to part-time. And that's largely based on her explanation of needing to be able to manage certain health challenges that she's got, which I think is completely fair and reasonable, but also to be able to facilitate the ability to go back to studying, which to me, there's a disconnect in the two objectives to try and achieve there while also working part-time. If you're stepping back to work part-time so you can focus on your health, that's one thing, and that I completely appreciate and I get. But to throw into the mix that you're looking to go back to studying as well, then it's not so much about the health-related conversation, in my opinion, as it is about making room for the study, because your health is taking a back seat to your study based on how I'm interpreting that. What are your thoughts?
It does sound to me like there are competing objectives, and having seen how our staff member has worked with us in the past, she does tend to get distracted quite easily, particularly if she's bored or she doesn't find the work that she's doing stimulating. So it is definitely something that a business owner needs to consider, because this is something that will affect how their business performs and potentially the output that is generated from an individual. There's obviously certain expectations that the business has for what they're trying to achieve, and depending on what type of work that person does will depend on whether it's income generative or not. So I guess my question to you is, based on the communications you've received and the experience you've had with this employee, how do you foresee this impacting your business?
At this stage, I think it has the potential to have a significant impact, because there is a lot of work that she takes care of which doesn't require me to put in that time. I can focus on other things and she can take care of the objectives that she's been tasked with, which frees my plate up quite a bit. It also has the potential to impact us in the area where, and this is a low level impact, we've paid for the assets that she's using over there, for the computers, the monitors, and the subscriptions and all that sort of stuff. We've also got an ongoing contract with a working space that's a part of that cost as well, which that is set to expire in about 3 months. It's not a huge cost, but obviously for a small business, every dollar going out is just as important as every dollar coming in. So I think that those initial financial considerations are definitely ones that need to be considered when we're looking at the scope of what we've got. But there's also the integrity question that I've got, which this isn't to question the integrity of our team member per se. However, reflecting on previous situations where we've had performance management related conversations around work volume, focus, distractions, doing things on work time that are not work related, such as watching hours of Netflix with no productivity. Those sorts of things, I think in any other position, someone would have been terminated, but we had an honest adult to adult conversation around that, with a focus on making sure that work objectives are met and that there's respect for the trust that we place in the individual. My concern at this point in time comes down to a combination of productivity and integrity. We've already had a demonstration where we needed to put controls in place around the integrity aspect, as I said, per the Netflix type situation. So how do we go about managing expectation in relation to workload and output versus our investment that we bring to the table as far as being able to pay for this?
Have you come up with some solutions which may be able to create a win-win situation for both your team member and the business?
Yeah, look, I think I have. And a lot of that is really based on reframing the agreement and how that structure is likely to work going forward. We've looked at our team members' productivity and what they've been able to achieve within the scope of certain projects and certain timeframes, and we've carried that forward. Now, this team member is green with a lot of the stuff that they're doing, so their potential to improve their skills and become more efficient and be able to create more in a quicker time frame of a higher quality is definitely there. She's at the beginning of a learning curve with some things, and we totally respect that, and we expect that there would be with growth higher level outputs and better quality outputs. So we're not pricing that in relation to this strategy. And what I think is fair and reasonable at this point in time is to take her current work deliverables for the project and the time that it takes to complete certain aspects of the project and pricing those against her current hourly rate. So instead of having her penalised for wanting to shift to part-time and potentially earning less, transitioning the agreement to one which is more of a gig-focused, like a piecework type deliverable, where you've got a project that needs to be completed, and it could be that you're creating content for social media posts, and we've figured out that, okay, historically she was able to do 5 of these in an hour, so the commensurate rate for that would be whatever it works out to be. And if we put that forward as a piece rate for the task that needs to be completed, and just allocate a due date for it, not necessarily an 8-hour work day, then that gives her the scope to be able to manage her time and slot it in wherever it fits in with her schedule. And she's still earning the same commensurate pay rate as to what she's earning now, probably a little bit better. Because as I said, we're not pricing in the fact that she'll get more efficient at things, or with this, she may have more of a motivation to be more focused and actually dedicate deep thinking or deep work time into it, rather than being distracted by being on chats on her phone or watching TV or whatever else it might be. So I think that there's the potential for her to have an increase in earnings and accelerate those earnings at the same time based on her own application of discipline within that.
Within that as well, you've got the aspect of if you're getting paid per gig and your quota is based on said number of hours, the quicker you get at it, you're going to get paid more frequently, therefore, or per gig. So if 4 hours has been allotted to a gig, but you've been able to accomplish it in 2 hours, and now you can do 2 gigs in the same time frame that you're able to do one, you're doubling your productivity and your potential. So the question I have, you've mentioned that this team member is quite green, and I'm assuming that your rates that you're considering are in alignment with that. So somebody who's on Fiverr or Upwork, as an example, who's proficient and has great demonstration of historical work, and they have a good management of their time and so on and so forth, their rate would be considerably higher than someone who's new to doing this. Is that how you've looked at it?
Yeah, definitely, because the thing to consider with that is that if you've got someone on Fiverr, for example, we'll use video editing as a sample gig to consider. Our team member's currently doing some faceless videos for us, where I've done the audio for the track and I've asked her to find stock images and stock video that line up with what the topic is to put that together. Now, not all of the content that's been selected matches really the intention of what the focus is. So we may be talking about, for example, sugar addiction and sugar in processed foods and additives, and the video is of someone cooking a barbecue. So they're not really congruent. So there's still some work to be done in understanding the brief and getting the intention clear in relation to what we need so that the visuals match the audio. But at the same time too, we've got areas where the audio work needs some considerable attention as well. The audio levels are far too high, so they're peaking out, and we need to get consistency in how that's done. So we're taking someone who's effectively like very green in that area, and we're training them and giving them access to resources that we've invested quite a bit in to help them get up to speed with being able to deliver a higher quality product than what they had experience in doing previously. So they're not able at this point in time to really deliver, for example, a 10-minute video project to the same level as someone on Fiverr who's charging $300 for. So they're probably closer to delivering something that's maybe a $50 product at the end. There's still a lot of work that we need to do in polishing that edit, be that in the selection of the content, the placement of resources, the audio levels, a lot of the post-production. So it's really what they're doing at this stage is promising, but it's still very much rough cut sort of work. So it does take some of the workload off the table for me, but it's definitely not a proficient, skilled Fiverr gig output that you're getting. So I don't think paying that Fiverr gig rate is really fair for us, because we're not hiring someone with those skills. We're actually getting them up to developing those skills. So there is that. And then there is also the opportunity for them to learn on our dime, which is what they've been doing for the last 8 months, to improve their resume and their capabilities. So I think from a win-win perspective, as you mentioned earlier, the capability of being able to complete more work in a shorter time frame because of focus, improved skills, higher efficiency, workflow management, whatever it might be, I think that's definitely there. And I think that that dimension of what I'm considering in this agreement probably opens the door for being able to offset what feels potentially like an insufficient pay rate in some people's eyes. But keeping in mind, with how we're pricing this, we're making this line up with her current full-time pay rate. So she has the potential to maintain the same earning capacity for the same output, but she can increase her output by being focused on doing piecework and getting objectives completed quicker instead of working on the clock, so to speak.
couple of points I'd like to make in relation to that. So one of the massive benefits I can see for your team member is that their time could potentially be managed in a way that they're not restricted to office hours. So if, for example, they are working on a project and they choose to do it on a Friday night because that's when they have availability and they're not distracted and so forth, they can allocate that time and do it as needed in the time frame that they have available to them. Whereas when you're in an employment situation, quite often there's an expectation that you need to make yourself available between 9 and 5 as an example. And whereas what you're offering this individual is the opportunity to select a gig in proportion to the time that they have available.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that there's a lot of value in that, as we've both experienced, transitioning away from being in a typical traditional employment situation to working remotely and having, in a lot of cases, the scope and the flexibility to work within the needs of the businesses that we support, but also on our own time objectives. That gives us the capability to add more value because we're able to focus on things at a time when it suits us more. And I think that there's something that's really quite dangerous in that as well, in that you really need someone who's got a reliable work ethic. If you've got someone who isn't disciplined enough to focus on these things, then whatever you're giving them just doesn't get done because they get distracted by life and other things come up. And your deliverables and objectives, particularly if they're hired on a flexi rate or flexi hour sort of type strategy, you seriously run the risk of them potentially, doing the dishes or mowing the lawns while they're on the clock rather than actually delivering. And then they'll come back in and work on things on their time because it's a swings and roundabout approach. For me, that's not problematic if you've got someone who has a good work ethic and they come from a place of integrity. They're playing above the line. But in a lot of cases, we've found that that is not a very common attribute, and setting the situation up in a way where it's almost incentivizing the person to be productive based on their terms. But at the end of the day, it's a win-win. I think there's a lot more value in that, a lot more flexibility. And as the gig economy is something that's becoming more prevalent and we're transitioning towards as businesses, I think it sets up more of a win-win approach for people so that they're able to, as business owners, we're able to get what we need at a fair rate and we can support people, but they're also able to get things to fit in with their quality of life and their immediate needs more effectively.
So there's a couple of items that I'd like to touch on based on what you've just shared. In the event that someone has a team member which is on the clock, as in working an hourly rate rather than a gig rate, you've mentioned that there are many challenges that come from that sort of a situation, particularly when people are working remotely and they get distracted because their dog wants to play or they just not focused on what they need to do. The first question in relation to this is, how do you manage someone that works remotely, for example in the Philippines, and ensure that they're actually meeting the objectives that the business has set them to do?
Currently, we're using a couple of tools. We're using ClickUp to help us manage the workflow and allocating tasks. And those tasks may require them to move through me and then through our team member and then back through to me and then back through to the team member. So there's multiple parties that are responsible for different stages of the project. So that tool helps quite a lot. And we did use another tool called Time Doctor a while back, which was originally set up to help us figure out, okay, how much time is being allocated to certain tasks? Are we allocating too much or not enough? What is the scope that we're looking at? What sort of timeframes are reasonable for this? We transitioned away from using Time Doctor because of a couple of factors, and we went to another platform called Apployee, which I found has actually been quite good. It's very, very well priced, and it gives us a lot of the functionality that we were getting with Time Doctor, but with a lot more simplicity and a lot more flexibility. So we're able to get Apployee to bolt on to ClickUp, and our team member can generate invoices through there based on their productivity, which I think those two working hand in hand to manage projects and time, and also for them to have visibility of invoicing and that flexibility, definitely adds a lot of value. Although I would say that we did learn a very valuable lesson in relation to how these tools are used, and I've experienced this with other businesses that use things like Clockify, where people can feel like they're being spied on or tracked. Now, where I'm coming from, and I've had this chat with our team member, is that I don't have time to sit there and watch someone work. If I had the time to do that, I'd be out with you having a coffee instead. I definitely wouldn't be sitting and looking at a computer screen choosing to micromanage them because I may as well be doing the work myself. So it's important to be able to communicate it from a place of honesty, that yes, you are keeping an eye on things from time to time, because look, while the cat's away, the mice will play. We know that. And you need something there to incentivize people to work honestly and with integrity outside of the pay rate, so that you make sure that you're getting what you're paying for. But at the same time, you also need to be able to monitor what's being done and consider the objectives and the workload from a perspective of fairness. Because if they're not able to take a lunch break, for example, because of the workload, and they don't feel comfortable coming up to you to say, hey, look, I'm just swamped. I can't get a lunch break in. I'm feeling like I'm getting stressed and I'm being worked to the ground. These sorts of tools and resources are really helpful in being able to make sure that you can see lunch breaks are being taken, because they capture things like screenshots as well. If someone flags that they're on a lunch break and screenshots are still being captured of them working, then you can have that conversation about saying, now look, this isn't right. You're on a lunch break. You need to stop working. You need to have downtime. You need to recuperate. This isn't a case of click I'm on lunch and keep going because you think it's the right thing to do. I really appreciate and applaud a solid work ethic, but that I think is probably a bridge too far.
The second point that you made was in relation to rewarding someone for their efforts. And you've already mentioned that this team member is considering going back to doing studies. In the event that this team member decided to do studies which were in alignment with the business objectives, as an example, it might be social media management or marketing or sales, would you consider looking at ways in which to help encourage them to stay on task with relation to the studies? So what I'm trying to get at here is, if we had resources within our ecosystem and the team member said, I want to be able to go and study marketing as an example, and we have resources within our ecosystem that provides education to them without them having to actually go to university, but they could study that in their own time, not on work time, would that be a good compensation arrangement, do you think?
Oh yeah, look, I think it's going to add value in a lot of different areas. And at the end of the day, bringing on team members is a bit like having kids. You're preparing them to leave you. And that's just the reality of the situation. You've got to acknowledge that people are always going to be looking for the next opportunity. And it could be because of financial motivators. It could be opportunity motivators. It could be geographical motivators. The great thing about what I'm hoping that we can set up with this is that there's no geographical boundaries. So should our team member choose to go and spend time with family in another province, as long as they're able to get done what they need to in the time frame that's there, then I don't want to sound like this is a heartless thing to say. I really don't care where they are. Now, I care where they are from a safety point of view, but it doesn't bother me if they're working from a cafe, library, a beach, a hotel, a family member's bedroom, or whatever it is. If they're delivering, great. That I think is brilliant, because it gives them the scope to be able to choose how to design their life. And I think that's something that we need to appreciate as business owners going forward, is that if there's the opportunity to do that and you're getting the productivity, just the value alone in that is important. Now, with that comes the transportability of study. As you mentioned there, we have got various courses that we've paid quite a lot for that focus on different things around business development, marketing. There's very solid mindset related trainings that we have as well, which we've gone back to again and again over the years. Now, these are currently open to our team member and to other people who we work with in this venture, but I can't really say whether or not they get access. Now, that may be because of time constraints, it may be because of a lack of interest, it may be because of a lack of awareness. And they're things that can be looked over, and we can make it known that these are there for you to learn from and to help. Now, that's not to say that I see them as being a replacement for a traditional education. If someone wants to come away from a university with a diploma or some other certification, then yeah, they're going to have to go through that traditional institute to be able to do that. But they could definitely augment their learning with the online courses that we've got and potentially accelerate what they're doing. So where I see a double-pronged value approach for these sorts of things is that if someone's studying a particular course and the work that they're doing with us is aligned with some of the submissions they're required to make, then they have the ability to have their work be their homework. So they can win by doubling down on this. As an example, one of our websites, there's a lot of very research-heavy content that we have, and it's largely in the health and nutrition space. We've done a lot of study over the years, and we've poured thousands of hours into the research that we've done to support the articles that we've created. We had a team member join us who was studying nutrition. How she had presented her resume was misunderstood by us, and that, I suppose, is something for first-time employers and small businesses who are looking at hiring to consider, is having more of a deeper conversation around these things. Because if it looks like one thing but it presents in reality to be another, then could you potentially have a conversation around the way the resume was framed and how honest it was? You probably could, but I don't think in this case that there was any intention to mislead. I think it was just a miscommunication, and I'll put that down to English not being primary language. So we hired this individual based on her having stated on her resume that she had studied nutrition with honours. I interpreted that to mean that she graduated with honours. Wasn't the case. So she'd done her first year, and I'm not too sure whether or not the nutrition focus was something that was like really a burning desire for her, so much as this looks like a good career path, so I'll chase it for the money. The challenge that then presents is that if you need to go deep into research from a work point of view, is your heart really in it? Is it something that really lights you up? And I don't believe that this was, even though we've offered and stood by the ability for this team member to have all of the content that she's created be published in her name. Even though she's been paid by us, she's had this published, and she could legitimately point to this as part of her portfolio, and that would go a long way to supporting any credit that you may be able to get through traditional education. Institutions would look at things like that and say, okay, well, you've got 100 articles published on this website with Harvard-style referencing, and we can go and have a look at what you've got there. And that may accelerate someone's trajectory when it comes to traditional education. So I do see the opportunity for the project and the education dovetailing, and I also see the opportunity for the courses that we've got access to that we can legitimately share with our team members, supporting them in their journey.
The intervention of AI has obviously caused some concerns within our business. And you mentioned that you'd identified that our team member had been using the tools to review her resume. In the review of her resume, she'd really bolstered herself up and presented herself in a manner that made her sound like she was significantly more proficient than she actually is. When you are interviewing people, be really, really careful and make sure that you ask poignant questions, because I personally believe that we were led astray. She never alluded to us that she hadn't completed her studies, and to say on your resume that you've done X course with honours implies that you have completed the course, in my opinion. We gave her the benefit of the doubt, but if you were to receive a resume and this person's applying for a role as a social media manager and claiming that they've made all of these impacts in the business, to make sure that you understand exactly what that person has done and a request to see some of their work, because in our experience, the deliverables versus what they're saying they're doing, they don't match. So just be really careful. And AI makes it really easy to embellish what you're doing.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And that was something that when I saw the improved resume there, and it was good to see that she was doing that. I really applaud that. But the prospective employer who'd be looking at that resume, I think the best advice I could give to them is ask for samples of work. Submit a project, or even task them with a project to complete as a part of it, and see how they go with that. Can they actually meet the standards that you expect? Because it's one thing to have on your resume that you are proficient with software such as DaVinci Resolve, video editing suite. I've been using it for years and I am not proficient. But to add that to your resume when you've really only just downloaded and installed the software, I think there's a disconnect there from an integrity point of view. And I'm not saying that our team member lacks integrity. I think maybe they're just trying to feather their nest more than what they really should be at that time. She's still young. She probably hasn't had too many people point out different things like that yet. Back when I was in my early 20s, I was still trying to find my feet, let alone figure out how to write a resume. And for any prospective employers, I would definitely, if I was hiring again for a position like this or for anything else, I would have a particular project or a challenge that I would submit as a part of the application process and say, okay, you're interested in this. Here's something that should probably only take 20 or 30 minutes. I need you to come back to me with a deliverable to show me the quality of your work based on what our needs are. And that way I can make a more informed decision about whether or not this person possesses the appropriate skills or knowledge in that area. Not trying to trip them up, but just trying to make sure that I'm actually getting to milk the cow before I buy it.
Circling back to something you mentioned earlier in relation to, rather than paying the team member as a part-time hourly rate, to then changing the contract to a gig per project price. In that, you also mentioned that the team member's proficiency in polishing their work is not quite there. How do you intend to get that polished product for the gig rate if the current standard of work is not completed to the standard that you expect being polished and finished and ready to post? How do you take your team member from where they are now to that point so that you feel like you're actually paying them for the completed gig rather than paying them for a gig that's incompleted and you're now having to still tidy things up?
Yeah, look, I think a lot of that comes back down to how much I'm paying as well. So we're not paying, for example, $300 for a 10-minute video. We're currently allocating the task, and it's taking about 2 days to come back with something. What is being presented looks good. I would not hit the publish button on it in its raw form. So we're spending time going backwards and forwards in training, looking at different things, providing resources on how to, for example, manage audio levels. So inside the work day, our team members currently being paid to watch training videos on how to improve their skills using different dimensions of the software. That could be in, overlaying subtitles right through to how to render and include the subtitles, and some of these are really simple little things, but unless they're being taught incrementally, then they're not likely to happen. So how I see that playing forward as far as with what we're doing, and again, I'm trying to take the fairest approach possible with this, is that I expect that the work will come back to me requiring some attention, and I won't hold the individual solely accountable for that. I'll contribute towards it. I'll provide support in areas where I can coach and provide training and access to resources and tips on how to achieve whatever the outcome is that we're seeking. Which if someone was advertising on Fiverr, for example, that they're providing this service on a gig base, they should have those skills, because otherwise it's back and forth and the payment just doesn't get released until the product is delivered to the client's satisfaction. Now, the other thing to keep in mind too is these people on Fiverr, they're fetching a higher rate for a couple of reasons. They're paying for their own hardware and software. They're paying for their own subscriptions. We, in this case, are paying for all of that. So effectively, we have a team member who would have no overheads to speak of operating under a gig-based economy. Now, the great thing for her is if she does develop a proficiency to the level where she finds that she can actually list on Fiverr and fetch those rates, and she's doing that using the hardware and the software that we provided, I have no issue with that, as long as the work that we're requesting to be done is done to the standard required and within the scope and the pricing that's required, because they've been granted a rather large concession in having some very expensive computing equipment and software provided to them at no cost. So I think there's a lot of fairness that I'm hoping to apply in that. And when it comes to the product and the deliverable being at a certain level, coming back to coaching and training and encouraging and supporting, there's a win-win there in both cases. If I was expecting someone to come to me with a polished product and me not needing to provide any support, then I should be expecting to pay more. But at the same time, I shouldn't be paying for their hardware and their software. That should be wrapped up in their rate and their responsibility, not mine.
If you require a team member to do a task, be really clear on what objective and what outcome you want. Because if you're working on a project base and you're saying to your team member, I want blah, they deliver that, and you change your mind and you now say, oh, well, I also want this, that's an additional project. So bear in mind that if you're looking at a gig style economy working with team members, that you need to be clear from the get-go. You do not want any ambiguity. You do not want to be adding stuff later, because then you can expect additional costs, which you maybe haven't budgeted for. And as a small business, that is a huge impact. So something to consider.
Perfect, Chrissy. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. Appreciate it.